Welcome to Hump Day Q&A. This is Sophie Acott from Happy Baby Sleep, and we're joined by Jet Acott today, who is having a bit of a hard time at the moment with teething and a head cold, so he's asleep on me. And today's question comes from Olivia, thank you, who asks about early rising and her 18-month-old. So I wanted to tackle the early rising one because it seems to be among the top 3 of the most common sleep difficulties that I encounter. And there's many reasons why our babies may be waking prematurely in the morning, but I wanted to address the main ones today and what we can do about them. So the majority of early rising actually stems from routine, I find. Routine, environment, and, obviously developmental leaps and illness and those sort of times. But, when it comes to routine, probably the main offender is our babies being overtired. So, being overtired can come from, a bedtime that's too late. So I like to focus on a bedtime that's between 6:30 and 7:30 ideally, and that works for most ages. So bedtime too late, also, if they're not napping well during the day, if they're missing naps, if you've been out and about, out of routine, that sort of thing, that can contribute to early rising. The thing that I wanted to also touch on, with the late bedtime, a lot of people think the later they put their child to bed, the later they're going to wake up in the morning, which is actually not true. It works to be the opposite. So sometimes, a later bedtime can actually keep causing them to wake early because they are overtired. So that's just one thing to keep in mind with that as well. And so, if they're overtired, they're not getting much sleep during the day. Also, you see a lot of early rising when there's transitions such as, moving from 2 naps to 1. So while they're making that transition, it's not uncommon that there's, a large gap in the afternoon where they haven't slept or, they resist bedtime or that sort of thing. So, the overtiredness again is the main catalyst for that early rising. Another thing when it comes to routine, on the flip side of that is that they can be sleeping too much during the day. So they wake up at anywhere between 5 and 6 because they've had enough sleep and they're wide awake and there ain't no getting them back to sleep. I'm sure some of you have experienced that and the frustration that goes with it. And then also to do with routine is the timing of nap 1. So there tends to be a correlation between that timing and how early they rise. So if they're consistently rising early, one of the things I get my clients to do is push out that first nap just a little bit later. So whether that's 15 or 20 minutes, and I say to do that for at least 3 days, 3 to 7 days ideally. That way, you've got some consistency and you can see whether or not that is a pattern, and that whether changing, that pattern is, it's successful, because a lot of us, as parents, we try something once, doesn't work, and we move on to the next thing. So really, for any consistency or to see any changes long-term in sleep patterns, we need to give it a good chance. So, at least 3 to 7 days, as I said. So that's the routine, pretty much in a nutshell. The environmental factors for early rising, the main ones are they're too cold. So, especially we're in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. So at the moment we're having 40-degree days sometimes. So when we're putting our babies to bed, they're in next to nothing, maybe just a nappy, maybe a nappy and a sleeping bag, unless of course you've got cooling. But if they're going down to next to nothing, in the middle of the night, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock tends to be the coldest part of the morning. It can drop down to anywhere sort of between 15 and 17 degrees after a really hot day, and our babies wake cold. So unfortunately, the temperature is probably the hardest thing to regulate this time of year. I find it much easier to remain consistent with the temp when it's in the colder months. So that's one thing. Also keeping a nice dark room. So babies will wake with the sun normally at 5 o'clock onwards. So if you can keep that room nice and dark, a dark room also signals to the brain to release melatonin, which is sleep hormone. So that's the reasoning behind that there. If you're finding that the room's quite light, then you can use alfoil or block out blinds, work quite well. So definitely keep that room dark. And then another thing is noises. So the birds start chirping at 5 o'clock. It's also that time that, a lot of parents may get up to go to work. So dad gets up, creaky floorboards, household noises. So, turning on the shower, that sort of thing, which can wake the babies. So I find that, using consistently white noise for naps and bedtime and you just keep it on all night, overnight, can work wonders with blocking out any external or household noises that would otherwise disturb them from their sleep and cause them to wake prematurely. So they're the environmental things. And then, you know, when it really comes to early rising, there's all these other things that we like to address, you know, I guess taking into consideration where they're at developmentally. So, you know, it's not uncommon during times of teething and illness and leaps for them to wake early. So, you know, what happens when they're going through developmental leap? They're learning so much, they're going through all this change and development during the day that a lot of the time they have difficulty switching off, you know. So when their bodies, you know, are working overtime, they can create cortisol, which is stress hormone, and then it can take a while for their bodies to process that cortisol. So that can actually keep them waking overnight. So what I do see commonly, you know, with leaps is that babies wake between 2 and 6 o'clock in the morning and they're wide awake, you know, for an hour or so, you know, and they're quite happy most of the time. You know, they might be practicing their new skills, so crawling or standing in their cot, or they might call out needing some intervention to settle them back to sleep. But that can be a trigger for early morning wake-ups, as well as teething and illness, and that tends to be, you know, just plain discomfort and pain that will keep them rising early. So, you know, if you can address the environmental and you can address the routine to keep that consistent, then, you know, you do have to accommodate for that other 20%, which is, you know, when they are going through a leap or milestone or teething, you know, because that is always going to happen. And there's really not much you can do. If you're keeping consistent everywhere else, there's not really much you can do at those times other than respond to your baby the way that they need. So if they need you to pick them up, if they're really quite distressed, then, you know, absolutely do that. If you need to sit with them to comfort them beside their bed, if they're having a hard time, then, you know, and don't we know all about that at the moment? It's been a really really rough 3 days for us since we started all of this. So, you know, you just do what you do, you know, the joys of parenting, and I always just say do what they need at the time. So so I hope that's sort of been a bit of a crash course in early rising for you. If you have any other questions, you know, feel free to comment on the post below, and, you know, I'll try and get back to you if I can, and also keep the questions coming. So thank you very much for your question today, Olivia, and look forward to hearing from you all next week. Thanks, guys. Bye.